Everyone talks about Paris, about Berlin, about Amsterdam. Almost nobody talks about Copenhagen, 1945, when the hunters became the hunted, when the men who tortured resistance fighters in cells on the 5th floor found themselves running through burning streets. When the secret police who thought they owned the city discovered that every corner, every shadow, every doorway held a Danish finger on a trigger. Shellhuset stood 6 stories tall on the corner of Nyrupsgade and Kampmannsgade in downtown Copenhagen. Before the war, it belonged to Shell Petroleum. By 1943, it belonged to the Geheime Staatspolizei, the Gestapo, 3 floors packed with dossiers on every resistance fighter, every sympathizer, every whispered conversation in every cafe. Top floor fitted with cells to keep prisoners close for interrogation. Basement with more cells for long-term torture. No transport needed. Everything under one roof. The Gestapo kept about 550 uniformed Danes on patrol in Copenhagen, hunting their own countrymen. They called them the Hippo Corps, Hilfspolizei, Auxiliary Police, established on the 19th of September 1944. The exact same day the Gestapo arrested 1,960 Danish police officers and shipped them to Buchenwald. 10,000 police in Denmark. Nearly 2,000 grabbed in a fake air raid warning. 60 died in Buchenwald. Another 71 in other camps, replaced by Danes in black uniforms with German masters. If you value documented European resistance history and the final collapse of Nazi occupation, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Danish National Museum's archives on the German occupation 1940 to 1945, published in their official historical knowledge database, and Operation Carthage mission reports held at Imperial War Museums in London, declassified Royal Air Force Tactical Air Force documents from March 1945. Now back to the information. By the end of 1944, the resistance in Copenhagen was dying. Leaders arrested, files building, Holger Danske losing men every week, BOPA cells rolled up. The Gestapo had names, had addresses, had informers in every neighborhood, and they had the Shell House with its archive that could destroy what remained of the underground. 2 men stood between the Gestapo and total victory. Bent Farshow-Weid, red hair, 23 years old, born 7th of January 1921 in Acerbo on the island of Zealand. Codename Flammen, the Flame, and Jürgen Hagensmith, born 18th of December 1910, dark hair, middle height, kind brown eyes. Codename Citronen, the Lemon, earned when he bombed a Citron garage and destroyed 6 German cars and an armored truck. Together they formed the liquidation cell of Holger Danske, driver and executioner. By 1944, the Germans had placed the highest bounty on Flammen that they offered for any resistance fighter in Denmark. According to Gunnar Dierberg aus Schei, who led Holger Danske Group 5 from 1943 to 1945, Flammen executed approximately 22 informers and collaborators. Citronen drove, they worked fast, a knock, a face, a shot. Gone. The resistance as a whole liquidated 385 people between 1943 and 1945. Danish Nazis, Gestapo informers, collaborators, people whose existence threatened every cell, every weapons cache, every safe house in Copenhagen. The Germans hunted them without rest. Flammen moved 30 times in 6 months, jumped out of windows on 3 occasions as soldiers fired at him. By spring 1944, only 3 members remained alive out of an original group of 25 in Holger Danske. Many killed on the same day. 19th of September 1944, Flammen and Citronen disguised themselves as Danish policemen. That morning, the Gestapo began rounding up the real police. At a roadblock in Copenhagen, a Schalburg Corps member, Danish SS, recognized something wrong. Citronen bolted, shot in the leg, fell. An ambulance arrived. Inside, 1 Schalburg soldier and 1 ambulance driver who happened to be Holger Danske. Citronen pulled a small gun from his boot, shot the Schalburg man dead, got to a hospital, left lung perforated, blood transfusion, then disappeared into a safe house belonging to a resistance engineer named Strum Tyson. A nurse named Ellen Christensen, herself a resistance fighter, treated him there. 15th of October 1944. The Gestapo found Citronen's safe house. First team went in, all dead. Second team sent. Citronen killed them too. Third team, more bodies. The Germans set the house on fire. When Citronen tried to escape the flames, they shot him. Multiple bullets. Took nearly 50 German soldiers to bring him down. The nurse Christensen was held at gunpoint while the house burned. Later, she found gaps in the German attention. Ran, tried 6 hiding spots before someone finally took her in. Her cover blown when soldiers found false identification documents in her purse left behind at the burning house. 3 days later, 18th of October, 1944, Flammen sat at dinner with his landlady and guests at a house in Jutland, all his weapons at Citronen's safe house in Copenhagen, unarmed. A knock at the door, German officer demanding entry. Flammen ran upstairs, looked for the roof, saw the house surrounded, no way out. He bit down on his cyanide capsule, dead in seconds. Witnesses heard German soldiers cheering upstairs when they found the body, heard them drag Flammen down by his feet, head bouncing on every stair. The memorial stone at his grave reads, "The best must die." In 1951, President Harry Truman awarded both men the United States Medal of Freedom posthumously. By then, they were already legends, the duo the Gestapo hated most, the pair they could never catch alive. But with Flammen and Citronen gone, the Shellhouse archive grew thicker. Every interrogation added names, every broken prisoner gave addresses. By December 1944, the resistance sent desperate messages through SOE in London, begging for an airstrike. The files had to burn. The prisoners on the 5th floor had to escape before they talked. The entire resistance movement in Copenhagen balanced on whether those 6 stories remained standing. RAF said no, too risky. City center, civilian casualties. The request came again, denied again. Then in January 1945, the RAF finally agreed. Operation prepared, delayed by German counterattack in the Ardennes, planned for late January, postponed, probably weather. Middle of March, the situation became intolerable. Another telegram to London. If the resistance mattered at all, strike now, at any cost. 21 Mosquito bombers and 28 Mustang fighters, 18 Mosquitoes were F.B. Mark 6 fighter bombers from 21 Squadron RAF, 464 Squadron RAF, 487 Squadron RNZAF, all from number 140 Wing. 2 more Mosquitoes from the Royal Air Force Film Production Unit to record the attack. Took off from RAF Fursfield in Norfolk, morning of the 21st of March, 1945, 350 miles to Copenhagen. Flight at wave height and rooftop level across the North Sea and Danish countryside. Plan: skip bombs into the lower floors to destroy the Gestapo records on the central 3 stories, while leaving the top floor intact, long enough for prisoners in the cells to escape. Time to hit when both shifts would be present and the document safes open. Scale models built, every street, every building, every rooftop studied. Pilots and navigators practiced on miniatures. The raid had to be perfect, precision not seen since Amiens. Acting squadron leader Ted Sizemore led as navigator. Basil Embry, commanding officer of 2 bomber group, flew one of the Mosquitoes himself. Force reached Copenhagen just after 11 in the morning. First wave came in at rooftop level. Mosquito SZ 977, T for Tommy. Pilot Wing Commander Peter Klebo, Navigator Flying Officer Reginald Hall, passing Enghave Station. The Mosquito hit a 30-meter lamp post. Wingtip caught the roof of number 106 Sunder Boulevard. Both 500-pound bombs ripped off and exploded. 12 people killed instantly. The aircraft crashed seconds later into a garage near the French Jeanne d'Arc Catholic School at Frederiksberg-Allée, 1.5 kilometers from the target. Forward section with cockpit and crew thrown onto Dr. Primas Vai. Both men badly burned. They died later of injuries and were buried at Bispebjerg Cemetery on the 28th of March. The rest of the first wave found the shell house. 6 bombs hit the western wing. Direct hits. The building erupted, flames visible across the city. But the crashed Mosquito at the school created a tower of smoke. Second wave approached, saw the fire, thought it was the target. 2 Mosquitoes in the second wave dropped their bombs on the French school. Only one continued to the shell house. Third wave came from the west. Saw smoke from the school. More confusion. More bombs on the wrong building. Institute Jeanne d'Arc, Catholic school for girls. Cellars full of children and nuns taking shelter from the air raid. The bombs hit. The building collapsed. Fire spread. Copenhagen Fire Brigade arrived. Pumped water. The cellars filled. The children drowned. 87 children dead. 10 nuns dead. 2 firemen dead. 4 civil teachers dead. 2 fathers who ran in to save their children dead. 67 children wounded. 35 adults wounded. At the shell house, the western wing reduced nearly to ground level. Danish Underground supplied a photograph the next day showing the building burning end to end. All 14 prisoners in the southern wing survived. No bombs hit that section. 3 prisoners under interrogation on the 5th floor when the raid began. 1 died. 18 out of 26 prisoners total survived. 55 German soldiers dead. 47 Danish Gestapo employees dead. 8 prisoners killed in the building. 4 Mosquitoes lost. 2 Mustangs lost. 9 RAF crew dead. 3 buried at Bispebjerg. 6 crashed over the sea, never found. The raid destroyed Gestapo headquarters. Destroyed the files. freed 18 prisoners, severely disrupted Gestapo operations across Denmark. The resistance got what it needed. But 105 civilians paid the price at a school that should never have been touched. On the 14th of July, 1945, 4 months after liberation, remains of an unidentified male casualty recovered from the shell house ruins. Transferred to the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Copenhagen, same thing 4 days later, both buried at Bispebjerg Cemetery, 4th and 21st of September, still unidentified, still in the rubble when Denmark celebrated freedom. The Gestapo never recovered. Shellhouse in flames meant the archive that threatened every resistance cell, every safe house, every underground operative, all turned to ash. The names memorized by interrogators scattered when those interrogators died in the rubble. The organizational memory of 5 years of hunting Danish patriots obliterated in one 11-minute attack. But Gestapo had more than headquarters, had more than files, had the Hippo Corps patrolling the streets, had 550 uniformed Danes and perhaps hundreds more in plain clothes working as informants, had interrogation centers scattered across the city, had safe houses for their own operations, had weapons caches, had a network that didn't die just because the shell house burned. The resistance knew this, knew every Hippo man's face, knew where they lived, knew their routines, knew their families, and now with the Gestapo crippled, with the files destroyed, with the spring of 1945 bringing Allied armies closer every day, the resistance had room to move, had momentum, had nothing left to lose. Holger Danske had killed about 200 informers and threats before Operation Carthage. After the shell house fell, the pace increased. The resistance as a whole executed 385 people during the entire occupation, most between 1943 and 1945, when the stakes were highest. The committee that supposedly selected targets left no historic evidence of formal structure, just results. Bodies found in alleys, bodies in canals, bodies on doorsteps with notes pinned to their chests. The Hippo Corps lived in fear, wore uniforms that made them visible, worked in a city where every citizen knew their faces and many citizens had lost family to Gestapo torture. Some went into hiding, some tried to blend back into normal life, some kept working, believing Germany would still win, believing the reprisals would protect them. By 1945, Denmark was a rundown country. Shortages everywhere, fear everywhere. The occupation that started with relatively light cooperation turned brutal after August 1943, when the Danish government resigned rather than institute the death penalty for saboteurs. German military commander General Hermann von Haneken declared martial law. German authorities arrested civilians, Jews, non-Jews, military personnel, took direct control of military and police forces, made Denmark feel occupied for the first time. General strikes erupted. Copenhagen workers walked out in June and July 1944. 97 killed, 600 wounded. Sabotage operations multiplied. Rail lines cut, factories bombed, shipyards destroyed. Forum Copenhagen blown up on the 24th of August, 1943 by Holger Danske using Tuborg lager bottles packed on top of plastic explosives. The resistance became visible, became bold, became willing to trade casualties for momentum. The Gestapo response was predictable. More arrests, more deportations, more executions, more torture in those fifth-floor cells before the shell house burned. 64 members of Holger Danske executed during the occupation. The Gestapo infiltrated the organization twice. Each time the cells rebuilt, each time new members stepped forward, each time the liquidation squads kept hunting collaborators, and the collaborators kept collaborating. Denmark had Danish Nazis before the war. Membership stayed low even during occupation. The National Socialist Workers' Party of Denmark, NSWPD, got crushed in the 1943 parliamentary elections when the population voted overwhelmingly for traditional parties or abstained. But the Nazis who remained were true believers, worked for the Gestapo willingly, informed on neighbors, arrested fellow Danes, wore the black Hippo uniform with pride. The Schallberg Corps, named after Christian Frederick von Schallberg, who died fighting for the SS on the Eastern Front, formed from Danes who volunteered for the Waffen-SS. These were not conscripts, not men following orders from a Danish government trying to preserve some autonomy. These were volunteers who chose Germany, chose Hitler, chose to hunt their own countrymen. By early 1945, the Danish resistance controlled something close to an underground government. The Danish Freedom Council, established September 1943, brought together multiple resistance groups to coordinate operations and resolve. Allied governments who had been skeptical about Denmark's finally recognized it as a full ally. The council represented Denmark's will even while the official government stayed dissolved. It channeled money from the Danish state's social ministry to resistance operations. It planned the transition from occupation to liberation. It compiled lists of informers, lists of collaborators, lists of hypo members, lists of Schallberg Corps, lists of Danes who worked in the shell house before it burned, lists of Danes who tortured prisoners, lists of Danes who signed deportation orders, lists of Danes who identified Jews for arrest, lists that would matter very soon, because by April 1945, Germany was losing. Soviet armies closed from the east, American and British armies from the west, the Reich collapsing. And in Denmark, everyone knew liberation was coming. Everyone. The resistance prepared to take control, the collaborators prepared to run, the Hypo Corps prepared to disappear, the Gestapo officers remaining in Copenhagen after the shell house raid prepared to evacuate, and the ordinary Danes who had endured 5 years of occupation prepared for revenge. 4th of May, 1945, 8:35 in the evening, British radio announced German surrender in the Netherlands, Northwest Germany, and Denmark. The Germans had withdrawn. Denmark was free. Surrender took effect at 8 the next morning, but the announcement brought people into the streets immediately. Field Marshal Montgomery received the surrender on Luneburg Heath, south of the Danish border. No Allied soldier on Danish soil yet. Just the announcement. Just the knowledge that the occupation had ended. Copenhagen erupted. Blackout curtains ripped down. Burned in bonfires in the streets. Candles lit in every window. Light returning after 5 years of darkness. Allied prisoners of war released from camps across the country. Soviet soldiers mostly, paraded through Copenhagen and Aarhus. People dancing, people singing, people weeping. Liberation Day, Befrielsen, but not everyone celebrated. Some people hunted. The Politiken newspaper, 4th of May 1945, page 3. The content makes interesting reading. Retribution already underway before the surrender officially took effect. Multiple stories not explicitly labeled as revenge against Nazi collaborators, but the context clear. Gunshot victims, bodies found, arrests without authority. Violence in the streets while the parties raged blocks away. Between January and May 1945, more Danes died from violence than in the previous 4 years of occupation. 1,531 deaths in 5 months, 1,154 deaths in the previous 48 months. The arithmetic tells its own story. The final months were the bloodiest, the endgame worse than the occupation itself. And when liberation came, it got bloodier still. May 4th and 5th. Suspected collaborators rounded up. Women accused of sleeping with Germans. Tiskerpegger, German girls, dragged into the streets, stripped in some cases. Swastikas painted on their bodies. Heads shaved, forced to march through crowds. Public humiliation, public rage. The candles in the windows and the screaming in the streets happening simultaneously. Liberation as celebration and execution both. Stickera, moles, informers, pulled from homes. Some shot on sight. Some taken to resistance safe houses for interrogation. Some held for eventual trial. Some just disappeared. 40,000 people rounded up in the days after liberation. 40,000 out of a population of about 4 million. 1 person in every 100 arrested. 13,500 eventually convicted and punished for collaborating with the enemy. The Hypo Corps became prime targets. Every uniformed Danish auxiliary policeman who survived the final months went into hiding or tried to. The resistance knew their faces, had their addresses, had waited for this moment. Some Hypo members arrested by resistance fighters still operating without official authority. Some killed before any arrest could happen. Some beaten by mobs. Some protected by Danish authorities who wanted trials, not lynch mobs. The chaos of liberation, where old rules didn't apply yet and new rules hadn't formed. The Danish Freedom Council tried to maintain order, tried to channel the rage into legal process, tried to prevent complete breakdown. But the council's authority was moral, not legal. The Danish government had resigned in August 1943. King Christian X and his ministers remained in the country during occupation, but not in functional control after martial law. Now, on the 5th of May, 1945, who exactly governed Denmark? The Freedom Council? The returning politicians? The resistance fighters with guns in the streets? The answer unclear for days. General Richard Dewing arrived in Copenhagen 5th of May at 4:32 in the afternoon. First Allied troops. Montgomery didn't arrive for another week. British forces under Montgomery's command liberated most of Denmark, but the eastern island of Bornholm they didn't liberate. The Soviets bombed Rønne and Nexø on Bornholm 7th and 8th of May, occupied the island 9th of May. Soviet forces stayed until 5th of April 1946. So while Copenhagen celebrated on the 5th of May, Bornholm endured Soviet occupation for another 11 months. Denmark's liberation not complete until the last Soviet soldier left Bornholm. But nobody in Copenhagen thought about Bornholm that first week. They thought about settling accounts. The resistance maintained lists. Now those lists came out, names read aloud, addresses visited, some arrests formal with resistance fighters presenting themselves as legitimate authority, some informal with groups of armed men arriving at doors. The line between justice and revenge blurred in those first days, the distinction between trial and execution not always observed. Over 10,000 people eventually stood trial in Copenhagen and other cities. Danish collaborator trials between 1947 and 1950. Just over 100 sentenced to death, 78 sentences upheld by the Supreme Court, no foreigners sentenced to death, only Danes, including 2 women. Several sentences later commuted to life imprisonment, including both women. 42 death sentences carried out. Firing squad, concrete foundation with a wooden shed, drain in the center. Executees stood inside, facing the firing squad. 29 executed at a military site in Christianshavn in Copenhagen, another 13 at a second location. The wooden shed later dismantled. Only the concrete foundation remains. On the old outer ramparts, in what became the free town of Christiania, forlorn, secluded, leafy. Easy to miss. A memorial site that most tourists never see. The place where Danish collaborators faced Danish firing squads, where the reckoning happened, where the price was paid. But between the liberation and the trials, between the chaos of May 1945 and the structured justice of 1947 to 1950, there existed a window, a period when the resistance still held power and the old state had not yet reconstituted, a period when lists circulated and men with guns made decisions, a period when the collaborators who thought they would escape found they could not, when hypo members who believed German victory would protect them discovered Germany was gone and they remained, when Gestapo informers who spent 5 years destroying Danish lives learned that every person they betrayed had friends, had family, had comrades who remembered. The Gestapo in Copenhagen effectively ended 21st of March 1945 when the Shellhouse burned. But the individuals who worked for the Gestapo, who wore the hypo uniform, who signed the deportation orders, who tortured prisoners in those fifth-floor cells, who informed on neighbors for money or ideology, they didn't end with the building. They remained in Copenhagen. They lived in apartments. They walked streets. They had faces and names and addresses on the resistance lists. And between the 4th of May when the Germans surrendered and the summer when some semblance of official order returned, those individuals discovered that liberation meant different things for different people. For the resistance, it meant vindication. For the ordinary Danes, it meant relief. For the former prisoners, it meant survival. For the collaborators, it meant the hunters had become the hunted. The secret police who thought they controlled Copenhagen found themselves hunted through the same streets where they once swaggered in black uniforms. The informers who whispered names to the Gestapo for years found themselves whispered about, pointed at, surrounded. The interrogators who broke fingers and burned flesh in windowless rooms found themselves in windowless rooms with the roles reversed. Copenhagen in May 1945 was a city of light returning and old scores settling, the blackout curtains burning in street fires, the candles in windows, the Danish flags flying again, and beneath the celebration, the systematic elimination of everyone who had made the occupation possible, not just the Germans who left, the Danes who stayed, the Danes who chose collaboration, the Danes who wore the enemy's uniform, the Danes who sold their neighbors. Those Danes faced a reckoning that made the occupation look gentle by comparison, because the Germans, at least the Germans were enemies, expected to be brutal, expected to torture, expected to deport. But the Danish collaborators, they were countrymen. They spoke the same language, grew up in the same neighborhoods, attended the same schools, and they chose the Gestapo anyway, chose the black uniform, chose the blood money, chose to hunt their own people. For that, the resistance showed no mercy. For that, the ordinary Danes showed no sympathy. For that, the price was blood in the streets of a newly liberated Copenhagen. The Gestapo headquarters might have burned in March, but the Gestapo's Danish servants didn't burn. They ran. And running through the streets of a city where everyone knew their faces, where every doorway might hide a gun, where every corner might hold a resistance fighter with a list and a score to settle, they discovered that fire might have been kinder, quicker, less personal. The bloody end of the Gestapo in Copenhagen wasn't the building exploding under RAF bombs. That was dramatic, but impersonal. The bloody end was personal, was face-to-face, was the knock on the door at midnight by men who used to hide from you, was the realization that the city you once controlled now controlled you, was the understanding that freedom for Denmark meant no freedom at all for the ones who betrayed it, and for some of those collaborators, for some of those Hypo men, for some of those Gestapo servants. The trials and firing squads that came in 1947 seemed like mercy compared to what happened in the streets in May 1945, when the occupation ended and the accounting began. One name appears again and again in the trial records: Johannes Rasmussen, arrested by the Gestapo in December 1943, broke under torture, informed on his former resistance comrades, but didn't stop with capitulation, extended his collaboration, became a Gestapo henchman, interpreter, interrogator, befriended his captors, worked with them willingly until someone from the resistance shot him in February 1945, left him bedridden, arrested the day after German occupation ended, tried, no mercy from the countrymen he betrayed, executed 1948, the pattern repeated across Copenhagen. Resistance members arrested and turned. Some broke and gave names reluctantly. Some broke and became enthusiastic collaborators. The enthusiastic ones faced the worst treatment after liberation. The ones who didn't just survive by collaboration, but thrived on it. The ones who seemed to enjoy the work, the ones who took German girlfriends and German money and German approval and wore it proudly. If you value documented accounts of how occupations end and old regimes face justice, subscribe. It supports deep research into these critical moments. Drop a comment telling us from which city you're watching. This research draws from the documentary With a Right to Kill, directed by Morten Henriksen in 2003, adapted from journalist Peter Ovig Knudsen's 2001 book After the Killing, which won the Robert Award for Best Full-Length Documentary in 2004. Also from trial records, held at the Danish National Archives covering the collaborator trials, 1947 to 1950. These are primary sources, court documents, not popular histories. Now, back to the story. The women faced different treatment. Tisker Pigger, German girls, women who had relationships with German soldiers during occupation. In Aarhus, young women known or believed to have relationships with German soldiers were dragged through streets before crowds. Hair cut off, most of it, not all, enough to mark them, then forced to march. Public humiliation, the same pattern repeated in Copenhagen and other cities. Some women stripped naked and daubed with swastikas, photographs taken, crowds jeering. The punishment designed not for justice, but for spectacle. The resistance officially liquidated approximately 400 people during the occupation. But in those first weeks after liberation, before formal trials began, how many more died in street justice? How many collaborators simply disappeared? How many Hypo members never made it to trial? The records don't capture it. The chaos made counting impossible. The anger made mercy impossible. Some resistance fighters wrestled with the killing. Gunnar Derberg, who led Holger Danske Group 5 and later admitted directing the killing of several German informants and soldiers, though never revealing the exact number publicly, spoke in interviews about the moral complexity. The documentary With a Right to Kill explored exactly this ambiguity. Whether the estimated 400 executions performed by resistance agents between 1943 and 1945 all met some standard of military necessity, or whether some were revenge dressed as resistance. Peter Ovig Knudsen's investigation found accounts from participants who said committees identified targets, but no historic evidence of formal committee system survived, just stories, just after-action justifications. The post-war period saw politicians like Frode Jacobsen and Per Federspiel defend the killings, but also saw others criticize them. The debate never fully resolved, the necessity accepted, the morality debated. The resistance lost more than 850 members during occupation, killed in action, dead in prison, dead in concentration camps. 102 executed following German courts-martial. For every 4 collaborators the resistance killed, the resistance lost more than 2 of its own. The exchange rate brutal on both sides. By the time liberation came, those ambiguities didn't matter much anymore. The Hypo uniforms couldn't be explained away. The employment records at the Shell House before it burned couldn't be denied. The signatures on deportation orders existed in archives. The witnesses to torture existed in hospital beds. The evidence was there. The trials would eventually sort it. But in May 1945, the sorting happened faster, rougher, with less procedure and more immediate justice. 40,000 people rounded up in the days after liberation. 40,000. Out of a population of about 4 million, 1 person in every 100 arrested, 13,500 eventually convicted and punished for collaborating with the enemy. The Danish economy was wrecked. Currency supply increased from 400 million kroner before the war to 1,600 million by liberation. The Danish National Bank had secretly begun printing new banknotes in late 1943 without German knowledge. The Danish Parliament passed an emergency law 20th of July 1945, published the same day. All shops closed for the weekend. By Monday the 23rd of July, all old notes outlawed as legal tender. Any note not declared in a bank by 30th of July lost its value. Instant reset. Instant elimination of black market wealth. The collaborators who had grown rich during occupation found their fortunes erased. Some collaborators tried to flee, tried to reach Germany before liberation. Most didn't. Most remained in Denmark when the surrender came. Trapped in the country they betrayed, surrounded by the people they oppressed. The trials dragged on for years, 1947 to 1950. Thousands processed through the courts, evidence compiled, witnesses called, documents presented, defense attorneys argued mitigation, argued following orders, argued survival. The courts mostly rejected those arguments. Danish citizens who voluntarily joined the Gestapo apparatus had made choices. Over 10,000 people eventually stood trial in Copenhagen and other cities, just over 100 sentenced to death. 78 sentences upheld by the Supreme Court. No foreigners sentenced to death, only Danes, including 2 women. Several sentences later commuted to life imprisonment, including both women. 42 death sentences carried out, firing squad. 29 executed at a military site in Christianshavn in Copenhagen, another 13 at a second location. The execution site operated from 1947 to 1950. Wooden shed with concrete foundation, drain in the center. The design deliberate, clinical, efficient. The condemned stood inside the shed, facing outward. The firing squad stood outside firing in. The bullets hit. The body fell. The blood ran down the drain. The concrete washed clean. The next case processed. Assembly line justice. Today, the site remains. Foundation visible. Shed long gone. Part of Christiania now. The Freetown. The autonomous neighborhood. Tourists walk past without noticing. No signs. No markers. No explanation that this concrete pad saw 29 men die for collaboration. The memorial forgotten. The history obscured. Frøslev prison camp near the German border became Forhus camp after liberation. Repurposed, now holding Danish Nazis instead of Danish resistance. Fritz Clausen, former leader of the Danish Nazi Party, interned there. The resistance initially ran the camp. Later, the Danish state formalized control. The camp became the country's largest correctional facility for convicted collaborators. By 1949, most collaborators had served sentences. The camp converted to army barracks. The resistance movement itself disbanded after liberation. The Danish Freedom Council dissolved. Its members returned to civilian life or entered politics. The men who knew how to kill collaborators had to learn how not to. The transition difficult for many, Gunnar Durberg became a public administrator, later worked in banking. Owned a horse farm for over 40 years. Published novels and memoirs between 1994 and 2000 based on his resistance experiences. Spoke publicly about the liquidations, acknowledged his role, defended the necessity, never revealed the full number he killed. Died 8th of January 2012 at age 90. The famous partnership of Flame and Citron became legend. The 2008 Danish film Flame and Citron, one of the most expensive Danish productions to date, starred Mads Mikkelsen as Citron and Thor Lindhardt as Flame. Huge box office success. The story of 2 young men killing collaborators resonated decades later, but the real Flame and Citron died in October 1944. Didn't live to see liberation. Didn't see the Shellhouse burn, didn't see the Gestapo collapse. They died believing the fight might still be lost. The posthumous Medal of Freedom from President Truman in 1951 couldn't change that. They died hunted. The Gestapo's end in Copenhagen wasn't a single moment. It was the systematic destruction of an apparatus that had terrorized Denmark for 5 years. The building destroyed by RAF bombs. The personnel killed in the rubble or arrested after liberation. The files burned, the network dismantled, the informers exposed, the collaborators tried, the guilty shot. Denmark lost approximately 3,000 civilians to the occupation. Between January and May 1945, more Danes died from violence than in the previous 4 years of occupation. 1,531 deaths in 5 months, 1,154 deaths in the previous 48 months. The Endgame always the deadliest phase. The 1,960 Danish police deported on 19th of September. 1944 suffered particularly. 62 died in Buchenwald before transfer to Mühlberg prisoner of war camp in December. 81 to 90 policemen died during incarceration. Another 41 died afterward from camp-related illnesses, bringing total to 131. Over 6% of the arrested police force dead. The 7,200 Danish Jews who escaped to Sweden in October 1943 returned after liberation. Most found their homes as they left them. Danish neighbors had maintained the properties. When the Jews returned, the keys were waiting, the furniture in place, the belongings preserved, but 470 Danish Jews had been captured and deported to Theresienstadt. 51 died there, mostly elderly, disease and deprivation. Danish Red Cross insisted on monitoring conditions. prevented deportation to extermination camps in Poland, 419 survived. Total casualties for Danish Jews during the Holocaust, approximately 120 out of 8,000, 99% survival rate. The highest of any German-occupied European country. The Museum of Danish Resistance in Copenhagen maintains the memory, displays on the occupation years, scale models of Copenhagen used by RAF pilots planning the Shellhouse raid, photographs of the bombing, photographs of liberation, photographs of trials. The museum preserves what participants remembered and what documents proved. One artifact stands out: a concrete foundation in Christianshavn, 29 executions, 29 Danish collaborators. The foundation remains where the temporary shed stood. The drain still visible, the location still accessible, but unmarked, unremarked. The history there but not announced, as if Denmark remembers but prefers not to advertise, as if the necessity accepted but the pride absent, as if executing your own countrymen, even for treason, leaves a stain that doesn't wash away no matter how many times you clean the concrete. On the night of the 4th of May, 1945, between the surrender announcement at 8:35 and the official liberation at 8 the next morning, Copenhagen existed in a strange state, occupied but free. German soldiers still present but powerless, collaborators still alive but doomed. Resistance fighters still armed but victorious. The hours between announcement and formalization were hours of settling accounts, lighting candles and making lists. Liberation for most Danes meant light returning. Blackout curtains burned, candles in windows, flags flying. Freedom from fear. But liberation for collaborators meant darkness descending, doors kicked in, lists checked, names called, and eventually for some, that concrete foundation in Christianshavn where the firing squad waited. On the 21st of September 1945, 4 months after liberation, workers still pulled bodies from the Shellhouse ruins. Still identifying the dead, the building that terrorized Copenhagen for 2 years took months to fully clear. The Gestapo's physical presence destroyed in 11 minutes by RAF Mosquitoes. The Gestapo's human legacy taking months to excavate, years to prosecute, decades to fully understand. Today, Copenhagen is peaceful. The Shellhouse was rebuilt. The collaborators served sentences or died. The resistance members aged and died, but the concrete foundation remains. The museum remains. The trial records remain. The memory remains, even as the participants fade. Because Copenhagen in 1945 teaches something worth remembering. That occupation ends, but consequences don't. That liberation brings both celebration and reckoning. That collaboration has a price paid not just in money or status, but in blood. The bloody end of the Gestapo in Copenhagen was the end of an organization, but also the end of every person who made that organization function. German and Danish, officers and informers, torturers and clerks. Every role necessary, every participant guilty, everyone facing judgment when the power that protected them dissolved. And the judgment came in bombed buildings, in street violence, in formal trials, in firing squad volleys on a concrete foundation with a drain. The judgment came and the price was paid and Copenhagen moved forward. But the foundation remains as evidence that some prices are paid in blood and some crimes aren't forgiven and some ends are bloody no matter how justified.